It's, as Bernard was pointing out, anthropology starts, in the 19th century anthropology is often blatantly racist, Eurocentric, nationalist, and always progressivist. In other words, the succeeding age or stage of development is always better than the last one, which is precisely what Solomons is talking about and refuting. And the converse, of course, the further you go back, the more deficient and insufficient everything was on every level. And that's been greatly overturned. Solomons goes on to, he also contributed to the idea that people work very little. And if you talk about work as a separate activity, it certainly wasn't always a separate activity. It obviously wasn't wage labor, but even as an effort in the world, it's often hard to say it's work, because sometimes it was inseparable from other activities, from being on the earth. And just to back up for a second, I think just want to bring out what I think are two things, and he says it very well here already, but Solomons points out that, I think it's already clear, but this point about if you can be poor, and if your needs are unmet, or no, let me put it this way, I always get a little confused. If your needs are met, you are not poor even if you own nothing, but if your needs are not met, if they're not fulfilled, you can own all kinds of stuff, and you're not rich or poor. I mean, of course, he's making this cultural point. And the other one, which he just skims over here, that the more culture you have, the worse it gets, is really stunning. And I don't even know why that is, and I'm not even sure he knows why it is, except insofar as he's explained it. But the other part of that is, the more culture, meaning symbolic culture there is in the world, the more work there is. It's precisely the opposite of the claims that are made. Technology will liberate everybody. Well, just look at it. Both parents are working. I mean, more people are working. More people are exhausted. It's exactly the opposite. And yet, our friends are out there championing progress and the factories and mass society, and they don't get this basic stuff. It's really about a very profound change in perspective. Which I think is one of the new radical currents of thought within anarchism. Well, and the other things about in terms of looking backwards at life outside of civilization, outside of domestication, egalitarianism of forager societies, and this was actually orthodox before the 60s and 70s, and Solomons and Richard B. Lee and so many other people. It was a given. There's no dispute about that. That was the basic ethos of that life, of man's society, meaning essentially food sharing. And by the way, and that's determined, for example, empirically in terms of, for one thing, looking at hearth sites in camps, in settlements that are usually movable ones at this point, very little sedentism at all. And if you're looking at these at a given stage, and you see these hearth sites, and what remains, what are the fossilized remains, it's roughly the same amount of stuff around each fire site. Well, it looks like equality. That's the beginning of determining something insofar as we can. And then later, around one hearth site, lots of goods, much more than all the others who are still at that other same level. Well, you can start imagining the inequality, the hierarchy. There's the boss person, the chief, or the one who has established himself over the others. I mean, and you look at several hundred of thousands of that, and you can start pegging things. You can start getting a picture just from these mute objects. There's a lot of literature I mean, and of course, these are big generalizations here. It's cutting across, obviously, continents and peoples and time frames. I grant you, this is kind of reductionist in that sense, but I think as general points, there's validity. This was before the institution of the objectification of women. We're talking about relatively a lot of equality and or autonomy between the genders. This is not all exactly determined either, but we can see what comes with domestication and what evidence there is in the cultural prehistory before that. Absence of war. There's no evidence of organized war. Band society, for one thing, simply doesn't support that. It's not, when the society is say 60 people, how are you going to raise an army? I mean, there's no, not to say there wasn't interpersonal violence. We don't know about that. I mean, that's one of the more unknown things. Living in balance with the earth. There's a basic kind of a general one. Without destroying it. I mean, living population stable rather than completely out of balance and leading so much to the other problems. And I think there was kind of a widespread feeling, well, but you've got these people, they were pretty dim, they didn't even know how to start alienating themselves from the earth, But now we know that's not true either. And this isn't disputed. I haven't seen it anywhere in the literature. Thomas Wynne, for example, and I won't go into all the details, but it seems to be a consensus that people a million years ago had the intelligence that we have, that modern adult humans have right now. Consciousness, of course, is another matter. We don't even know what consciousness is. I mean, how do you measure that, or how do you establish that? I don't know whether there's really anything on that for example, speech. I mean, there are only guesses about speech, by the way. We know in written languages, that's an artifactual thing, there's physical evidence, but speech, some people say maybe 35,000 years ago when the first cave art began, and some people say, oh no, probably 1 million or 2 million years ago. That's absolutely a toss-up, pick one, It's, but in terms of the intelligence, and there are all of these different, categories, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, and so forth and so on. And I'm aware of that, even though there's some of that is a little unstable and a little questionable. But we do know, for example, that people were cooking root vegetables with fire to soften them up 1.9 million years ago in some places. And in some places, and this is the ocean regions between what is now Australia and South Asia, people were traveling on the open seas 800,000 years ago. And very recently, some of these things are quite recent, and they usually always push back the level of adequacy even further back. Fairly recently, they found in Germany, pretty close to the same area of the Neanderthal River from which the Neanderthal species gets its name, wooden, very long, heavy wooden hunting spears, and usually nothing, even bone doesn't, almost never, you can't find it, it just disappears, it's not like stone tools, but in this case it did. Absolutely perfectly balanced, tapered hunting spears, 400,000 years ago. It wasn't just some stick that they might throw at something, but a complete heft and balance. And that reminds me also of the Acheulean hand axe. There's famous pictures of that. These teardrop-shaped axes that are perfectly, they just look like some exquisite artwork with all chipped out and exactly, with often edges sharper than surgical steel 1 million years ago. Anyway, one of the things that actually is a little maddening about this, my friend Teresa Kintz is she's an archaeologist and a primitivist. And what is a little